November 2006. He's gone. M4, again. Ianto Jones looked towards the door of the hub. From the air a screech came. Ianto looked up and smiled. The pterodactyl sat in the rafters, opening and closing its wings. Gone. Tosh looked across from the computer, as Ianto held a coffee. Then, she turned back to the monitor and peered at it. Moments later, the route of the SUV was being tracked on the transparent 4D screen just a little way back from the table. Ianto ambled over. Jack told him not to, and look what he does. It was rare for Tosh to backbite. Ianto looked at her for a moment, then shook his head. Mark Jones got too close to the rift, he told her. And now, every spare moment he has, up at Torchwood for, treating her. Do you think that's what it is? Toshiko asked, concern in her voice now. When was out on a job with Jack? In fact, she was regularly out on a job with Jack. This time, they were at Reese's work. Something had come up there, and here they were. She was data processing. Ianto was getting coffee. Could be, Ianto told her. I remember him. He worked in the same place as Lisa. His voice trailed off. Lisa. The pain was much less now, but it still got him. Sometimes. But I remember her more. Mallory. And her father, who came regularly to Torchwood 1. Suppose he thought he was protecting her. But Mark was really interested in it. He studied it a great deal. Do you suppose it might be addictive in some way, Ianto? Tosh looked to the hub door. It was where they had last seen Owen, going through it, wishing them a good night. Do you think Owen is compelled to visit there? Not just to see Mallory about her headaches, but... Before Ianto could reply, slow, contemptuous hand clapping began. They turned together to see Jack at the hub door, the mechanism open. It was surprising Wen was not flanking him, Ianto thought, bitchily. Those two were barely apart these days. Nice try, but no, said Jack, shaking his head, and sashaying over to them. Toshiko closed down the map that was tracking the SUV, her face flushing red. No, reiterated Jack, Owen has already stuck his oar in and all he was supposed to do was cure a woman. Now, if you would get that data across to me, Tosh, I can see what activity might have come through the rift in the last 24 hours that centered on the docks. Jack turned, making eye contact with Ianto for a moment. But Ianto Jones was not about to be fobbed off by his intermittent lover. Not after he had spent so much of his own time looking into Mallory. She had been on Ianto's mind ever since they had visited Torchwood 4 in the summer. Something didn't add up, and the more Ianto searched, the more questions that he answered, more arose. But he was clear about the rift. Something about the rift and Mark Jones having been married to Mallory linked together. Was that why he got ill, all of a sudden? Did Mallory have some sort of ability to get into the rift which harmed her husband? No, Jack, Ianto protested. It was something to do with the rift, major rift activity, he told Jack. The captain did not protest when Ianto went on. It wasn't just the Nazis, Jack, he told him. 1942 a freezing winter. Same as 62. 63. He took some steps towards their leader, who was staring at him, stony-faced. And everyone remembers the hot summer of 76. No one remembers it was almost as hot in 77. Right, Jack told him, and glanced to Tosh. When he caught her eye, he nodded, and continued. So we have extra weather activity, anything else? Well, continued Ianto, thinking about what he had read the night before. The Bay of Pigs. That was 62, and the end of civilization as we know it. What? The Sex Pistols version? Jack gave Ianto a grin. I was there, he added, looking wistful. Then, he slammed his fists to his hips. Look, read what you like into it, Ianto Jones, you are just trying to self-confirm here. But, Ianto protested. But, Tosh chipped in, nodding towards the SUV tracking output. Owen had tried to disconnect the ones he knew about. But a part of Sophie, the organic computer, was hitching a lift. Her display was still transmitting back to Tosh. What we do have is a Torchwood employee alone and vulnerable, Who has moved Torchwood for? Jack folded his arms. Where to? Only myself and Tartanachi know. Maybe not, said Ianto. What do you mean? Ianto turned as Toshiko flashed up the road network. A bleeping was coming from Tosh's hard drive as a dot appeared on the screen. The SUV was speeding up the M6. As they watched, they saw the dot head off onto a knee road, and then onto an unnamed road. Jack looked furious. Ianto made to move towards him, but instead, their leader trod the gantry towards Tosh. Get him back, Sophie, Jack demanded, tearing over to the organic computer. Tosh on it. Toshiko tapped onto the keyboard. Immediately, the red dot on the 4D screen came to a halt. Jack took a step back and then looked between Ianto and Tosh, watching as the dot began to head towards the M6 again. Owen would be cursing, imprisoned in Torchwood's vehicle, heading away for T4. As the dot headed south down the M5, the look of relief on Jack's face was palpable. I've got to go out. Gwen and Reese, he added. When Owen gets back here, tell him to stay here. 88,888,888 August 2018. It's touching how people still remember. Gwen's words came to her lips before she had even thought about them. Ianto, dying to save the children. A tenth of them, at any rate. Flowers, some of them fresh bouquets, little single blooms. Some with notes, some with a ribbon. From the direction of the Norwegian church, Jack strolled. Swaggered, more like, Gwen thought. And looking no older than when she remembered him, standing not far from where they were now, bringing her through the roof of the hub to street level, opposite the Senate building. They were chasing Susie then. Now, Gwen was chasing a ghost. Or, perhaps a future. Beside Jack, a boy hovered, the dark-haired, pale-eyed boy who had run into the Williams house, bursting to beg Jack not to leave Roddy but, in the end, had said nothing. When Captain Jack Harkness ventured, his hand flat on the boy's back and gently edging him forward. Meet David. His parents are dead. Well, one of his parents is dead, he added, gazed at Shrine. So many memories, he added, moving his hand to from the boy's back and caressed the wall as if it were part of Ianto himself. Jack, Gwen said, cautiously. Are you saying, Ianto was David's father? And Jack turned heavy eyes towards her. As am I, he told her, slowly. And that David and Roddy are twins, he confirmed. Yes. Born to the same mother. Born to Mallory. So, Roddy is your son too? Jack moved imperceptibly closer to David. Make sure when you fill in the form for school you put down Roderick Jack Harkness, he added. He is a Harkness, and no mistake. But Gwen was simply staring at her former boss, Mallory. But she had no choice. Gwen, he told her, pulling David close to his leg, and putting a hand around his head, protectively. She had been the butterfly for so long, nipping into the rift, emptily unaffected by its time and space junk that flies around randomly. But you see, it did affect her. It took its toll on her mind. I used her, he admitted. It was a case of know nothing that was coming out of the rift, or know a little of something. So, those headaches, Gwen told him, then laughed a laugh of reminiscences, recalling things long past. And, even though I knew it was going to kill her, I still would have sent her. Jack added. There was no mirth in his recall of the past. We knew things in advance we could prepare. Mallory had a choice, and she chose Torchwood. Jack began to walk away, turning back towards the church, David still beside him, clinging to his leg. Gwen watched them for a moment, the air around them seeming to part for a moment. Or, was that just her imagination? Jack, she called, and the captain stopped, waiting for Gwen to catch up. Please, she said, her tone quieter. You have told me this much. Jack's shoulders sagged, and he stepped towards a bench, put there, presumably, for the view across the bay to Penrith. At least they had their back to the rift. David sat beside his father. Gwen sat on the other side, hardly daring to think what she might hear, yet holding her breath, so she did not miss a single word. When they were born, Jack told her, they were born inside the rift, just as Mallory herself was born, to Ren. Ha, he said, as he followed a fishing boat coming in from the sea. No one else was strong enough to go in with her. Roderick begged and begged to go, but he would only have been destroyed. Ren went, and I with her. Because you were a time agent, when finished. Because it cannot touch you, because you cannot die. Jack smiled a little, but made no gesture to confirm or deny her statement. Instead, he continued with the story, one which had meant something only to him until a few weeks ago. And then it had become Gwen Williams' problem. Because I was the only one who could midwife Ren. She went in 1941. We came out in 1962, still bearing her child and in a lot of pain. I had to get the brigadier, his wife was a nurse of the highest caliber. She told me what I needed to do. When we re-emerged, Mallory and I, Ren was nowhere to be seen. I went back for her. I looked for her. Jack shook his head. I left Roderick with a baby daughter and went back into the rift. But each time I was further and further from finding her. David looked up to his father from the crook of his arm. Jack steadied his arm on the boy's shoulder, and composed himself. In the end, Roderick thanked me for Mallory, thanked me for bringing her to him. He both knew the risk, and now at least, he said, Ren was safe from Torchwood 1. Safe from Unit. And Mallory? Gwen prompted. But it did no good. Jack had stopped talking, but he was far from over. Gwen leaned back a little, looking at the Cardiff seascape. Mallory, Jack put in, suddenly. When she was born, when I carried her out and placed her in her father's arms, brought through a bitter time for herself. I remember, the garden, Gwen told him, bright and sunny, like the most beautiful summer's day, full of flowers. And then she sat forward, for something had occurred to her. But, I don't understand, Jack, she told him. How is it that Mallory came to be pregnant with twins? Ianto. Hack turned and shook his head. Like her mother, she fell in love, he said, simply. Who? Can you not think? Roddy's resemblance to his father is uncanny. You can't mean ... Owen? Gwen shook her head. Owen, who mocked and derided her, who loathed his visits to Torchwood 4, and he loved her, Jack told her. He fell in love too. But all too soon, he was dead, and never knew. I tried to tell him, when he was dead, but still existing, it meant nothing to him, just as life as a corpse meant nothing to him. Owen and ... Mallory? Gwen said again, trying to get her head round it. No worse than you and Reese, Jack put in. A more incompatible pair I never set eyes on. Now, hold on a minute, Jack, Gwen retorted, holding up a hand. Leave Reese out of it, all right? You're saying, Roddy's parents were Mallory and Owen, so, what about David? Genetic modification, he said, simply. Ironically, Mallory perfected it for alien use. Replacing the genetic material in the egg cell with my own, a short round of IVF and then, David, he said, simply, run the boy's head. Twins? Gwen asked. But, I should never have done it, Jack confessed, interrupting her. Their birth caused the rift to split into two. I thought I could untain it, but, as it did with Mallory, it calls them, wants them to be reunited within it. And you are fixing it. Then Roddy can come home with me, and he and David can ... carry on growing up together. We do all make a good lot, don't we? Said Gwen, shaking her head at the incredulity of Jack's story. Owen and Ianto, you and me, all of us, with children to our name. Pity Toshiko couldn't have lived a little longer. I think she would have given a lot to have got together with Tommy. Gwen got to her feet. Jack did the same. David, the boy who now looked so much like Ianto it was paining her to look at him, got up too, and clung to Jack, his other father. So, what help do you need? Keep an eye on Roddy. Report to me anything he does you think is strange, unusually strange, not his usual strangeness. Gwen thought the words through again, and then nodded. Use this telepathic paper, Jack added. Put nothing on web. Decline digital permission. Fill in his school application by hand. Hackers, alien hackers, using the web to try access the rift. Knocks out servers for days. And the remnants of Unit, as single-minded as the Stasi. Jack, when asked, now we are back together, are we Torchwood 3 again? She watched Jack glance back to the waterfall, the centerpiece of the modern art at the regenerated Cardiff Bay. His eyes drifted to the cafe, and the steps that led to the shop, that was a front for the door of the hub. If it makes you happy to be so, Jack told her. Because it makes me worried to the pit of my stomach, he added, looking out across Cardiff Bay, then pulling David close to his leg. Where do I begin? Gwen asked. Jack looked down to her and smiled. We need a team, he told her. Then we can be Torchwood 3 again. With who? Gwen demanded. Reese. Captain Jack Harkness, he told Gwen, and his old familiar smile came back and he clapped Gwen on the shoulder. Let's go, eh?